African history, colonial rule in Congo Leopold Roman II. The Congo 1855–1914. The territory covered by the Congo River basin attracted a lot of European attention and interest during the second half of the 19th century. Nearly all the powers involved in the colonization of Africa had interest in this region, and it is partly held responsible for having sparked off the scramble and partition of Africa. Much earlier than 1855, the Portuguese had established themselves in a small colony of Cabinda south of the mouth of the Congo River, and for quite some time they had laid claims over a vast hinterland of the small Portuguese settlement. The French had also shown their own interest through their explorer de Brazza, who had explored the Algar River from Gabon and reached Stani Pool. He had also proceeded to sign treaties with the Makoko chiefs and among the Bait people of the Congo. He also persuaded the French government to take over to this territory as a French colony between 1875 and 1878, although the French government declined, preferring to have only trade relations and not political relations. At around the same period, H.M. Stanley of the British Royal Geographical Society had explored Uganda, Western Uganda, and the Congo Basin. His reports and publications had stimulated the interest of the British traders who operated in the region, despite the fact that the British government did not buy his idea of British colonization of the Congo. But economic interest was positive. H.M. Stanley turned his efforts towards Leopold XI of Belgium, a small European country who bought H.M. Stanley's idea of colonizing the Congo not as a colony of Belgium but as a personal property of Leopold XI. The Congo was colonized by Leopold as a private colony between 1880 and 1908, when it was transferred to Belgium as a country. Methods used by Leopold XI to acquire the Congo. In 1876, Leopold formed the International African Association (IAA). Leopold XI hosted an international conference in Africa, particularly on geographical matters, and at this conference, the delegates agreed to establish a chain of European posts across Africa from Dar es Salaam to the mouth of the Congo. These stations, he argued, would be bases of the suppression of slave trade, promotion of legitimate trade, and the introduction of Western civilization to Africa, and no annexations would be carried out, more of a humanitarian move. However, his real aims were to make massive trading profits by establishing himself a political empire in the Congo Basin. He went ahead to use explorers, particularly H.M. Stanley, to explore the region and map it out. He also was recruited by Leopold XI to carry out expeditions throughout the region to seek for treaties with African chiefs in establishing trading post or stations. He later amalgamated or joined up all the trading posts and established African history, colonial rule in Congo Leopold Roman II. Leopold XI persuaded the international community to accept his claims diplomatically and through the use of bribery and deceit. To the Americans, he promised the end of slave trade and the struggle against it in the region. The British were promised free access for her merchants in the state. The French were promised support in the acquisition of Congo Brazzaville to the north of Congo River. The Portuguese were promised to secure Cabinda and support for the acquisition of Angola, where they had interest. Germany secured support of Leopold XI for her claims over Tanganyika, Namibia, Cameroon, and Togo. He diplomatically maneuvered the powers. Through his agents, Leopold XI used outright force in which military expeditions were sent against African independent societies and forced them to accept or comply to accept Leopold's rule. These agents included Stanley himself, concessionaire companies that forcefully annexed territories in the name of expanding their commercial companies. These trading companies were instrumental not only in the annexation of the territory, but also in its administration and exploitation. Among the famous companies were Company du Katanga, the Congo Company of Commerce and Industry (CCCI). These companies annexed, administered, and exploited the Congo on behalf of Leopold XI, so effectively that Leopold XI never even set a foot on the Congo soil. Another method was the formation of a strong militia called Force du Public in 1895, which force was used to crack down any form of resistance or opposition to his rule. It was used to crack down the Bashi resistance 1900–1916, Bayaka resistance, the Azand of Northeast 1892–1912. Leopold also used collaborators as his agents to acquire and extend his influence. These collaborators were African leaders who had already established themselves and accepted coexistence with the Europeans, like Tipu. Tipu, who had established a commercial empire, had accepted the governor of Stanley and agent of Leopold. Although, when the Belgian monarchy took over, Leopold made it clear that he was going to crush the Swahili Arab control of the trade. Tipu escaped back to Zanzibar. Leopold XI also used missionaries to attain his goal of acquiring the Congo. Although he did not finance them, he allowed them to operate in the region, something that earned him international recognition of Congo. Among the missionaries that operated in the region included the Baptist Missionary Society at Lukola, White Fathers at Kabanga in 1879, Holy Ghost Fathers at Stanapol in 1873. Methods employed by Leopold XI to exploit land and labor in Congo. He used forced labor. Africans suffered compulsive work on private settler plantations and those owned by concessionaire companies. If they were paid any wage, they were meagre, but in most cases, they were paid nothing, as Walter Rodney put it. The European who wanted to see a railway road built offered lashes as the ordinary wage and more lashes for extra effort. Forced labour was used on public works like roads, railways, construction of government stations like the construction of the Free State Administrative Centre at Bomas. Free labour was also to go and work on Katanga copper mines that were under a private concessionaire company. Taxation was also used to exploit land and labour. In Congo, poll and hut tax were imposed to raise revenue for the financially crippled Leopold's government. Paying taxes compelled Africans to seek employment from concessionaire companies and other private enterprises to obtain money. There were also instances of collecting money in kind and form of rubber ivory. This subjected African labour service to exploitation where they suffered. African history, colonial rule in Congo Leopold Roman II. An amputation of limbs was administered to act as an example to the rest. Worse of it was that the revenue collected was repatriated to enrich Leopold's public palace and public projects in Belgium. Method of mineral exploitation. After 1900, it is reported that mineral prospecting and exploitation was the order of the day in Congo, such that by 1914, Katanga was becoming Africa's major mineral-producing centre north of Witwatersrand. Africans who worked in the minerals were underpaid. Others were mobilized on a forced labor basis. Apart from mineral exploitation, concessionaire companies also exploited other natural resources like timber and rubber. Prominent among the companies which exploited Katanga copper and other resources was the company du Congo. The land policy was also employed to exploit African land and labor in Congo. In 1891, Leopold XI came out with the regime dominale policy, through which all vacant land were declared government land, and this was land that was neither occupied nor exploited by Africans. This land had been used by Africans for gathering, hunting and shifting cultivation. Moreover, all dawn and ale land contains rubber, and Africans were barred from freely collecting it. In this way, the Africans lost their land. Then they had to avail their labor for exploitation. Leopold also leased some portions of land to private companies on a profit-sharing scheme. Indirect rule method was used. The Belgian administrative hierarchy consisted of African rulers at the very bottom, and these were supervised by other African officials in the army occupying the bottom ranks known as sentinels. These also punished culprits in rubber collection. To note is that the African rulers who were employed were very brutal. The use of such personnel was to enable high output and payment of taxes. Africans were exploited by fellow Africans. There was signing of agreements and contracts. These were mainly signed with concessionaire companies to develop public works. For instance, in 1886 a contract was signed with the company du Congo pour le commerce et industrie CCI to construct a railway road connecting Leopoldville, Kinshasa to Matadi, and for every 1 kilometre of a railway constructed 1,500 hectares of land would be given. A series of other companies were also given concessions to exploit land. To note is that Leopold was not interested in developing public works in the Congo. Emphasis that was put on cash crop production and agricultural development. Rubber production on African land was emphasized. Food production was dropped due to this shift in emphasis, and yet Africans were underpaid if the rubber was brought at all. As a result, neglect of farming led to starvation, famine, and depopulation in the Congo Free State. It is reported that the population of the Congo by 1911 had fallen by 2/3 in only 20 years. African land and labor were also exploited through the development of transport systems. In the Congo, railways and roads were constructed, like one linking Matadi to Leopoldville, another to connect Lake Tanganyika, and also one to link up Katanga. It is on these transport networks that forced labor was applied. More of the land was taken from Africans. This important development, though the roads and railways pointed towards the Atlantic coast, hence acting as sucking tubes for the Congo resources. There was a method of raiding that was employed in Congo. For instance, women and children were taken hostage to be ransomed by men and or relatives supplying the forced labor service. Due to these brutal economic policies, in addition to the coercive administrative ones, there was international outcry in Europe and America that compelled Leopold XI to surrender his property, the Congo Free State, to the Belgian government. African history, colonial rule in Congo Leopold Roman II.